There's also more of an interest by young lawyers in technology, in the firm being technology enabled in these areas. And so because, for whatever, there's a variety of reasons for it, but law firms have been a little bit behind business, typical business as it relates to investing in technology.
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify and stay tuned for our weekly episodes. I'm your host, Lydia, and with us today is Robert St-Jacques, Director of Legal Talent at Clark Wilson LLP in Vancouver, Canada. Welcome to the show, Robert.
All right, Lydia, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing me on board.
So tell us a little bit about your start as a lawyer, Robert, and how you moved into the talent space.
Yeah, so I spent the first 5 years of my career as a labor and employment attorney. And then, like so many of the folks in that specialty, I got hired by one of my clients, which was a global retailer and manufacturer of eyeglasses called LensCrafters. And then from there, I ended up working for some other Fortune 150 companies, moved on to Dubai, where I was also a combination of in-house counsel plus senior HR leadership roles. Then I moved into technology, was based in KL for a while. And then finally completed my around the world tour here in Vancouver, where I've been working predominantly with tech companies, also a combination of human resource leadership and being general counsel. My last role before this one was head of people and legal for a gaming company. And now my career has come full circle where I'm back in the law firm, but not as a lawyer, as head of legal talent.
So let's go to the hiring of legal talent. Have you noted any significant shifts around the hiring of legal talent over the last couple of years or maybe the last 5 years?
Yeah, so a few areas, right? So one of them was accelerated, and that's the demand for hybrid work. And tied to that is also the interest in work-life balance. There's also more of an interest by young lawyers in technology, in the firm being technology enabled in these areas. And so because for whatever, there's a variety of reasons for it, but law firms have been a little bit behind business, typical business as it relates to investing in technology, changing their processes, and so on. So it's still very much a craft, professional environment, and so therefore, the use of technology has not proliferated. And so we have a mismatch of expectations in the sense that these young attorneys, mid-20s and so on, coming into the firm, which is not at the level of technological advancement that they're used to in their personal lives, right? So that's creating a bit of a mismatch there as well. Some of the positive things that have been happening and have been dramatically, accelerated is the concept of DEI. And so there's a bit more focus on, diversity in the workplace, especially when you consider that, for about, 10, 15 years, the majority of law school graduates have been women. A large minority are BIPOC folks, right? And so you see the demographics changing both within the firms and within your talent pools as well.
And in terms of hiring talent for a law firm such as yours, what are some key skills or qualities that you look out for when you hire legal talent? I mean, this goes beyond just technical legal knowledge.
Yeah. So it's interesting, there was a book that came out a few years ago called The T-Shaped Lawyer, where, there's a concept in learning and development being T-shaped. So like the top of the T is the depth of your knowledge and skills in the function that you're in. So my HR knowledge, IT, being able to code, right? the T-shaped on top is those soft skills, right? So do you know how to delegate? Do you know how to coach? Do you know how to give feedback? Do you know how to plan? Do you know how to, all those little soft skills that have nothing to do with your function per se. And so what we're looking for is either some of that T-shape to be formed, or they have some of the foundational or characteristics of that. And what do I mean by that? The first part is, what we call a client service mindset. If you think about it from a client point of view, right? If you're a lawyer and the client calls you up, it's either they've got a big deal going on, and so, they're excited. But in many cases, your client is having the worst day of their life. They got sued, they got a lawsuit, they got a letter from the tax authorities, whatever, and it's the worst day of their lives. And then being able to approach both of those with a level of calm, professionalism, and look at it as a privilege to help, be given the opportunity to help another human being in need. That's what we talk about in terms of client service mindset. And then, building out on the T piece, you're looking at project management skills. If you think of a case, right, you've got multiple parties involved in multiple steps that the result isn't really guaranteed, right? So having good project management skills, is very helpful. Influencing skills, being good negotiator. Relationship management, because you have to manage your client. Maybe if you're a young associate, you're managing a partner, your relationship with that partner. You're managing your relationship with opposing counsel, right? Who may be a nice person, maybe very not nice person, right? But you have to learn to navigate. EQ, emotional intelligence. Business knowledge, understanding the basics of business. Some areas of law, family law, right? So some kind of, social science background, psychology background. Data analytics, and then one piece we touched on earlier, right, was what we call technology enablement, right? So how to take plain technology and apply it to these problems and help improve processes. So it's beyond now, hey, did you get good grades in law school? It is, that overarching piece, keeping in mind that the foundational one is that client service mindset. And, individuals who see the ability to serve another human being as a privilege.
So you talked about some trends earlier, such as hybrid work and more work-life balance that is more in demand. And how do you see these trends impacting the day-to-day operations of a business?
So, when you start looking at these trends coming through, right? So let's just take one, hybrid work. It's beyond just, okay, you can work from home X many days a week, or all days a week, or one day a week, whatever it is, how your organization defines hybrid, right? There are all kinds of knock-on effects for that. So for example, if you have a remote culture or you require people to work from home, listen to that word. I'm being very careful choosing my words. Require, i.e., we have office sharing. So you can't be in here every day. So we're quote unquote requiring you to work from home. Here in Canada, for example, there are tax advantages. So you need to change employment contracts and make sure that is a line item in there so that they can take advantage of certain deductions, which they can't do without that being mentioned in their employment contract, right? So it's things like, those where, and it gets into policies. How does this affect individuals? How does it affect promotions? How does it affect training? How does, all these other areas? How do you comply with health and safety requirement training? So before people had to come into the office, everybody got around, everybody learned all, they needed to know from XYZ health and safety, safe handling of chemicals, right? There's all these provincial and federal regulations related to that. How do you do that? Does the online stuff work? Well, how is safety chemical handling relevant to people sitting at home, right? So you've got all these. Then you've got, in terms of surveys, right? So you still have regulations regarding ergonomics and so on. So how do you, without short of going to people's homes and measuring their screens and measuring their chairs and all those those types of things, right? So you can see these things that's just one. That's hybrid work alone, all the knock-on effects. Start looking at your benefits, right?
So these changes that happen across different requirements in employment contracts, how do you go about making these changes happen?
Correct. So you start with, first of all, deciding on what hybrid means to you. So I've been at all extremes, right? So you have the 100% remote aspect of it. And so then what you need to do is literally go top to bottom in terms of think of the employee life cycle. How does this change our employer branding, right? So this is even before we get to recruitment marketing or job ads, right? This is branding. How do we portray ourselves? What do we need to change there? Our recruitment process, what do we need to change there? More video-based on those levels, right down to onboarding. How do we onboard people without ever seeing them? IT, when do we have to tell them that somebody's joining because they have to ship a computer overseas maybe or across the country, right? And so you need to give people more lead time. So yeah, you don't have to find an office or a desk anymore, but IT has to figure out how to get a computer to somebody in Slovakia. And then you go through onboarding. How do you onboard? How do you convey information through Zoom calls, through onboarding? Then how do you do integration, right? So after the onboarding, okay, you know where everything is, kind of. Then we move into integrate you. So what kind of activities do we do, right? So before it was like, hey, give a bunch of people money, go out to a restaurant, have a meal together, boom, you're done. That's not an option anymore. Your team is now in 17 countries. And so how does that, work together? So with different time zones and so on. So we can't just have a meal together. So we're having 3 meals together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner at various times, right? And so we send people Uber cards or whatever it is in their country. So you see all these little pieces going on. Same thing. How do we explain compensation? How do we do compensation? How do we legally do it? So usually you outsource with a company like Deal or Remote, and they handle the contracting for you in those countries. And so then there's a whole list of compliance requirements on that side. And then you do performance management. How do you communicate, the expectations and continue to build your culture, right? So it just continues all the way down. So if you think from beginning to end of an employee life cycle, almost to exits, right? So how does that happen? How, if somebody wants to leave in Slovakia again, how do you get the computer back? How do you set all those pieces up? So it requires a top to bottom re-engineering of not only your policies, your processes, and sometimes your technology. And if it's a little bit too complicated, then, in the case of international comp, it's probably easier to outsource.
In terms of all these changes and all these multifaceted effects that you see based on just one trend alone, what should employers be considering in terms of a long-term strategic plan?
Yeah, I'd say go back to basics and think about it, right? If you're an athlete and you have an inkling that you'd like to try different sports, one fundamental and foundational thing that you could do is get in great shape, right? Because then it doesn't matter if I go swimming or biking or running. If I am physically fit and could do certain activities for long periods of time, right, I have a better chance of adapting and enjoying the new sport, right? If I'm already in shape. That's what I advise for businesses. Use this opportunity to make these changes because they're happening, whether you like it or not. But here's the important piece. Learn from this and create and adopt a mindset of agility and change management, right? Because you've got other things coming down the pike. Let me give you another one example. So people are now struggling with hybrid work and how they're going to do it. The conversation's already happening, 4-day work weeks. You use this experience to document your process, to get, folks in your organization used to that change, trying to speed up the pace of change so that you can continue to be agile. You work those muscles so that when you're faced with another challenge like the 4-day work week, hey, we just handled hybrid. Cool. We had lots of lessons learned. We've created this change management process, communication, stakeholder engagement. all these kind of things. Now we're ready to move this through instead of like stumbling along. Now we're going to confidently run through it because we have foundational knowledge, foundational skills in agility and agile mindset and in change management. So then you're able to roll with these changes. Another one is ChatGPT, right? So you've got AI coming in. How do you then adapt to that? If you use current activities like hybrid and those as your training wheel, so to speak, as your training event, document your processes, in terms of change, then you're more able to meet, some of the challenge like ChatGPT or AI head on.
Have you used ChatGPT or any AI technology?
Yeah, so here's where we had, in terms of law, you need to be very careful, right? Because we cannot upload any client-specific information into an open source, right? Because it absorbs it. All right, and so it's a limited use in terms of law firms, in terms of legal work and client-related pieces. So they can ask queries on, updated laws and things like that, as long as no client information goes in. So it is being used there. Where I saw it used before was when I worked for a gaming company. Same thing, in terms of creation of art. So it's interesting because AI just follows the process. So what used to happen is our artists used to look at the catalog of stuff that we did, and there's 400,000 assets, I believe. And so they'd type in fire, and then like maybe 800 fires that were created before would pop up. And they'd look, and then they'd find one, and then they'd modify it and create a Pride fire for Pride Week, right? And then put that into the game. Fine. So they took something, made it better, made it more relevant, put it into the game. What AI does is instead of having to look through 800 fires, you can say, I want to create Pride fire, and I want it to look like our stuff, right, in our game, so it doesn't deviate. And then it'll help you create it, right, like a draft version, and then you would make the changes. But with AI, it sped up the process. So it's not the job killing, everybody, is going to be automated. Quite the opposite. It's, if used carefully, it's a helper. And then it actually does a lot of the drudge work.
Exactly.
And so that, the folks we had working for us, where their skill set was elevated, right? They became more editors rather than just listening and transcribing.
The first draft is taken care of to a certain extent, right? So that's the real heavy lifting, the ideation, or that first draft of brainstorming, for instance. And so, Robert, let me just move into a different issue that's affecting recruiters and even affecting brands, employer brand, as you said. Lots of companies have been experimenting or have even moved into things like 4-day work week, as you said, hybrid work, fully remote work from anywhere, that sort of work arrangements. But we're also seeing more and more instances of recruitment fraud in which these scammers, they use the company's name and contact information falsely. They target the candidates without the knowledge of the company or the official recruiter. So how can companies and recruiters, legitimate recruiters, protect themselves from any sort of brand damage as a result of these activities?
Yeah, first and foremost, make a very clear statement on your own career website. We do not charge candidates. We only accept, CVs through this process, through this specific website. If you haven't, and then same thing saying that if you're contacted by one of our recruiters, please go back to LinkedIn and you will see they actually work for us. So here's what to look for. And then we say, here are our recruiters with their LinkedIn profile. So we say, if one of these four people, if one of these four people is not contacting you, it's not right. Or it could be a situation of fraud. And so you put as much information as you can on your own website to start, right? And to make it clear. The second piece is, again, coming at it from my legal side from back in the day where the companies I worked for were subjected to this, depending on where they're based, sometimes you take legal action. So you find out, where these folks are from. They will take copies of your ads, like aggregators, right? And then put their own contact information. So sometimes you can follow them. And it was, I was lucky in the sense that I worked for the government of Abu Dhabi and some of their semi-governmental organization. So that carries a lot of weight. And most people, when I said cease and desist, they did so. Same thing with the bigger brands in the world, right? Because everybody knows that we have deep pockets and will go after you. And so that discourages people. Also, we put an email address, which is if you've been, approached by anybody who's not one of these 4 recruiters, please let us know who it is. Please, give us the information. And we would then follow up with those people with a tersely worded legal letter, protecting our brand. So it's the front end loading in terms of your own website, making it clear this is our process. 1, 2, 3, 4, and these 3, 4, 5, 10 human beings are the only ones that should be contacting you. If it's anybody else, please click this link and just forward an email that or text or WhatsApp. We even had a WhatsApp number that you can forward it to capture some of these activities on that side. Then you get a reputation, right? Once a few legal letters go out, and they say, "Oh, okay, there's easier companies to go after." And
great employer brand, and it's out there.
Yeah, and then they're so excited to be working for them when that's the last thing we want, right? Is for these people to have their hopes built up and then to be swindled, in many cases, right, by folks asking for payments. And charging people for a job is a violation of probably most countries' laws, and I know a few international conventions as well, right? So again, let's call it what it is. It's a criminal act that these folks are engaging in. And, my advice is to front end load it on your website and be aggressive.
So what might be some ways to scan through or to find out, if you're being mentioned? Do you use any tool to find out if you're being represented falsely elsewhere?
Yeah, we do. Sometimes we've paid for services in terms of, who's basically using our ads, right? Because you can use the word. It's almost like a plagiarism checker.
Exactly.
Who else has got this out there?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're aggregators. Sometimes they're just far-flung aggregators from Lithuania. So, between either service or the recruiters, they typically tend to find where these are available, but the scammers have gotten really good, right? So they will contact people through LinkedIn, right? And say they're from an agency representing us. And that's the other piece too, is that typically we rarely used agencies. And so we would state on there, we only work with these 2 agencies, and we state them as well.
So, Robert, I missed this part earlier, but I wanted to bring up diversity, DE&I, as you mentioned earlier, being one of those things that we look out for in terms of talent, because, talent pool has become so diverse. And as you said, even in legal hiring, you're seeing more diversity. In what ways can an organization make DE&I part of their employment practices and practices particularly, and how can it be implemented?
Yeah. So the first piece there is, having your leadership plant a stake in the ground, right? Very publicly stated. So, here in North America, there are numerous lists that you can join, and you put up your hand and say, we, Corporation X, Y, Z, we agree to, improve diversity. And then here are our metrics. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how we will focus on inclusion. Very public pronouncements. So that's the first piece, so that everybody knows that you're serious. Second is that, large corporations usually included in their annual reports, right? There's a section on DE&I. Some provinces, some state require you to submit reports to the government as well, showing how your initiatives are going, based on your own targets in that area. It's also a big push on the pay equity side. But you raised a really good point, right? Before it used to be gender, maybe a little bit about race, right? But now, because of the intersectionality of all these pieces, right? So you're looking at neurodiversity, LGBTQ, right? Gender and trans folks, and a lot of this intersectionality coming into it. And then, so it's very important before you even work on the diversity piece, to make sure you have the inclusion piece, right? Because you can bring in all these great diverse candidates, but if they don't feel welcome at your workplace, if there's not other people like them there, right, it's going to be tough to retain them. So that's why I always say I'm going to shift it around and say, make sure that you have an inclusive workspace, because otherwise all the work that you do getting diverse candidates, it's going to be potentially wasted because the people won't feel that. It's not only where people feel that they can belong, it's where people can thrive, right, and bring their whole selves to work. And that's when when you start seeing those anecdotes and when people start posting about it without being prompted on LinkedIn, talking about your company that way, that's when okay, we've created a great thing here internally. Now let's go be even more diverse, right?
And that's a great point. When you take it one step at a time and you're looking at stages of development in terms of implementing, then you really get to see the results and anticipate the results that are about to, that you can expect by making it broader and expanding in terms of processes. And in terms of HR, technology is a must today. It's a digital world that we're in, and these technologies also help us. So what kind of impact do you think these technologies and tools will have on recruitment and will continue to have on recruitment?
Let's start with the job ad. So there are some great tools out there to make sure that your job ad doesn't favor one gender in front of another. It's not offensive to certain cultures and people, and it's clear and welcoming to, and you can even do it the other side, right? And I've done that before. So where I use language specifically to appeal to women, right? So if the diversity target is you're looking to bring in more women into the leadership team. If you write a job ad that talks about winning and killing, and being aggressive and
tone takes
conquering the market, right? All these very aggressive words. Again, studies show that women are less likely to apply for those. If, on the other hand, you talk about getting results, right? So it's still about getting stuff done, but doing so in a collaborative manner, doing so working as a team, right? And those types of things, then, what some surveys have found is that women, tend to apply for those in larger numbers. So it starts there, right? So that's one piece of technology, right? And then you've got, your applicant tracking system. Then you have, in terms of when they come in, then you have testing regimes. So this is an important piece for DEI, in the sense that if you engage in skills-based hiring, you will see the inevitable result is going to be a more diverse workforce. For example, here in Canada, we have a great technical school called University of Waterloo, and they have a comp sci program that's world-renowned. Okay, great. So people always say, yeah, just get me a top graduate from Waterloo and comp sci, and that's it. Well, what you're going to get is predominantly white or Asian males, right? Coming out of that, if that's the thing. Our point is, well, we're hiring developers to make code. And so we said, okay, it doesn't matter where you learned it, whether you learned it at Waterloo or Niagara College down the road, right? The little college, it doesn't matter. You either know how to code well or you don't. And so by focusing on skills, what we found was over the course of 6 months, we went from single digit to 38% women. We went from low double digits in the teens to 54% BIPOC. Increased dramatically LGBTQ, increased dramatically neurodiverse. We see that through self-disclosure. So just by focusing on being skills-based rather than the right school, the right degree, the right former employer, we just went perfect, down to the basics and said, okay, who knows how to code? Who matches our values as an organization? And those two things, and when we brought those folks in, here's the interesting piece, productivity went up 19%.
And this is, when did you do this analysis on the applicants? After seeing the productivity, or was it before, or which one informed the other?
So we saw the numbers coming through, right? In terms of people, sometimes it's obvious, in terms of gender and race or national background. Obviously, some of the other areas were less obvious, right? And so we saw that coming in, we saw the numbers improving. And then when we did the survey a few months later, then we saw some of the other areas in terms of neurodiversity and LGBTQ folks coming in. So some of it was, we saw it happening live. And then the other one was a nice surprise later. And then, that organization ended up being on the Great Place to Work list, not top 10. So that's where, to me, that's the branding. That's where you're powerful. If you don't have to say it, you're living it, and your people internally are talking about it to their friends, and their friends are broadcasting it out. That's really nice. That's when you're walking the talk, and your employer branding efforts are working.
That's how far skills-based recruitment can take you. That's a great example. Thanks for sharing, Robert. And you've given so many great, tangible, useful tips today on the show. What advice would you give someone who's starting out in the talent space today?
I'm an optimist, but I'm also very curious, right? So that would be the one piece, is either hopefully you are curious by nature. If not, become quite curious about everything, because there are numerous solutions to problems, right? So people have asked me, like, why have you done 42 HR tech implementations? Why can't you just stick to one product? Because the one product may not be the right fit for that company. And so I start over again almost every time. So I talk to the stakeholders. I look at the data. I look at some of the latest research that's coming out from academia, right? And then my past experience. And what happens if I'm intellectually honest? I put out an RFP, request for proposal, and it's almost a different system that wins every time, because I'm curious about that organization, how it runs, and who the people are and where they want to go. And it's that innate curiosity, and then taking all that information and going, you know what? I think I got something for you this time. And not just what I did at my last job, right? The reason I was successful there is because I listened, was curious, and dug in, asked a million questions about everything. And then I was able, through the dialogue, I was able to craft a solution that was good for them at that time. But that all comes from just my genuine curiosity about people. So it's about absorbing, being curious. And then the last piece, right, curious, is don't be afraid to experiment. And use that word, right? Because if you say, I'm going to change the policy, I'm going to change this, people go, change? No. If you say, hey, here's a problem. I think this may be a solution. Why don't we try it with a small group over here who you've already spoken to and they know they want to change, right? So then you look for what we call positive deviance. And so you do an experiment, or, in corporate world, they call it pilot test. So those are the two big things. Stay curious and don't be afraid to experiment. Sometimes changing a policy, a new system, a new process is too far. Start with an experiment.
Thank you so much for joining us on this show, Robert. So, for the viewers who are watching us and listeners who are on our podcast right now, where can they find you? What's your preferred channel?
Okay, my preferred channel is LinkedIn. So go ahead and either follow me, connect with me. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I do believe in knowledge sharing. I am where I am because people have shared their knowledge with me. Right? It's not because I'm unique or special. I thought of these things. No, I've had people who have shared their time and knowledge with me, and I'm happy to pay it forward.
Thank you very much, Robert. And we have been in conversation with Robert St-Jacques, Director of Legal Talent at Clark Wilson LLP in Vancouver, Canada. Thank you for joining us this week. Remember to subscribe to our channels to stay tuned for more insights from All in Recruitment.